Hello, and welcome to the Center for Democracy and Technology's training on the equitable use of algorithmic systems in education. In this training, we hope to give state and local practitioners like teachers, administrators, and tech managers the tools they need to safely use algorithmic systems. To that end, we'll talk about what algorithmic systems are and how they're used in education, some of the benefits and harms of using these systems, and best practices for using these systems in an equitable and responsible way. First of all, let's take a look at what algorithmic systems are and some of the ways that they're used in education. Algorithms are a series of steps or mathematical operations performed by a computer. Algorithmic systems, in turn, are tools that rely on algorithms to answer questions, make decisions, or perform tasks. These systems often assist humans or perform tasks that have historically been done by humans. For instance, teachers and administrators have always kept an eye out for students who are at risk of falling behind academically, and algorithmic dropout early warning systems aim to assist them with that. You might be more familiar with the terms artificial intelligence, or AI, and machine learning, or ML. These technologies are examples of algorithmic systems. Now that we know what algorithmic systems are, let's talk about some of the benefits and harms of using these systems in education. On the benefit side, algorithmic systems can increase efficiency, freeing up educators' time so they can focus on the core of their work, educating kids. Additionally, these systems may identify patterns that humans wouldn't have noticed, or identify them earlier than a human would. In a dropout early warning system, this might mean flagging that a student is falling behind before the teacher notices, so that the student can get support as early as possible. However, there are also potential harms that can stem from using algorithmic systems. For one, algorithmic systems can muddy the question of accountability. If the reasons for a system's decision are unknown or not transparent, parents and students may have trouble seeking redress if they disagree with that decision. This can be exacerbated if it's unclear who is ultimately responsible for the system. Is it the teacher who uses it, the administrator who procured it, or maybe the vendor who built it? Additionally, algorithms may miss signals that humans would have noticed, especially if people become overly reliant on the system and ignore their own judgment, like a teacher who's concerned that a student is falling behind, but questions their perception because the student has not been flagged by the early warning system. Finally, algorithmic systems can introduce or exacerbate biases. This can be due to biased data being fed into the system or flawed design of the system itself. Either way, this can cause further harm to already vulnerable student populations. Unfortunately, these harms are not just hypothetical. For instance, there have been several examples in the media of harms stemming from algorithmic systems designed to help educational institutions adapt in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. One example are systems designed to predict students' grades, such as the ones used in place of the A-level exams in the United Kingdom and the International Baccalaureate exams. These systems caused an outcry after they produced unexpectedly low grades, in some cases putting students at risk of losing their university admission. The United Kingdom reversed course after this outcry, but many International Baccalaureate students were left in academic limbo. Now that we've seen a bit of the harms that can stem from using algorithmic systems without proper consideration, let's talk about best practices that can help protect students from those harms. There are several best practices to bear in mind that can help protect students when using algorithmic systems. We'll discuss each of these practices further on the following slides. The very first step when considering using an algorithmic system is to consider whether or not it would make sense for your needs. Would it actually accomplish your goal? If so, it's important to take the time to consider how it might cause harm to students. What are the risks to their well-being and rights? Is there any way to mitigate those risks? If so, what steps would you need to take to do so? Make sure those steps are documented so that future users of the system know how to use it safely. Part of using an algorithmic system safely is making sure it's only used in the context it was designed for. For instance, consider a facial detection system designed for a low-stakes task like image tagging. That system might not perform well enough to determine if students are masked before they enter a classroom, because that's a higher stakes task, as students could lose out on educational time if the system makes a mistake. The system would have to be redesigned and retested for the new task. As with the last best practice, document the context the system is meant for so that future users know where the system is designed to be used. For systems coming from a vendor, make sure to get information from them about what context and limitations the system was designed for, and include that in your documentation. Another key element of using these systems safely is making sure that all stakeholders involved have a chance to ask questions and raise concerns early on, before the system is put into use. Since different stakeholders will have different viewpoints, they can help spot potential issues before they arise. Setting a broad table will help with this process. Stakeholders should include anyone who will be involved with the system, be that administrators, teachers, or students and families. To make sure all parties can really participate, make engagement as easy as possible, whether that means providing information in multiple languages and through multiple channels, or by holding meetings at a range of different times so parents with non-traditional schedules can join. Usually, algorithmic systems consume and produce lots of data, and that data can pose risks to students. So it's important that all data is incorporated into your data governance practices the same way that any other data would be. That means that there should be guidelines for how it is used, when and how it gets deleted or archived, and who has access to it. For vendor-provided systems, make sure those data governance policies extend to the vendor as well, and spell out the policies and restrictions in the vendor agreement. A critical component of managing algorithmic systems is understanding the ways that they can reproduce or exacerbate bias and discrimination, and managing these concerns. A big part of that is investigating the data that will be fed into the system, since biased or non-representative data will produce biased results. Importantly, algorithmic systems are not always good at distinguishing between correlation and causation, and that can reproduce bias. For instance, if a system takes in a dataset that shows disproportionately more white students in enrichment programs than students of color, that might be because the parents of white students are wealthier and more likely to pay for testing. But the system might instead draw the conclusion that whiteness is a good predictor of whether a student belongs in an enrichment program, and thus discriminate against students of color. To manage these concerns, it's important to examine data for potential sources of bias before it is used to train or feed a system. For vendor-provided systems, be sure to ask them about their training data and how they ensured it was suitable and unbiased. If they don't have good answers for these questions, the system might be biased and thus harmful to students. Another important way of ensuring that algorithmic systems are used safely is making sure that there are humans who understand the system well, can explain its decisions and put those decisions in context, and, where necessary, intercede in or adjust the decisions. For vendor systems, this might mean ensuring that your school maintains access to support from the vendor for as long as you are using the system. In addition to understanding the system itself, any decision makers using the system should also understand the idea of automation bias, a phenomenon where people are more deferential to decisions from algorithmic systems than they would be to human-made decisions. It's important to recognize and avoid this bias, since the point of human involvement is to add nuance to or override the system's decisions, which is difficult to do if people are overly confident in the algorithm. Because systems tend to evolve over time, it is important to keep auditing the system and the data it uses for as long as it is in place. This means auditing for bias in the input data as well as in the results. Also, it is important to audit for accuracy and effectiveness. Is the system behaving as you expect it to, and are the results useful to those who are using it? For vendor systems, make sure that they are doing these sorts of audits internally and ask to see those results. For many algorithmic systems, students will be impacted by the decisions the system makes. Because of that, students and families need to be able to question and contest decisions that they feel are incorrect or unfair. To that end, there should be a human who has authority over the system's decisions and can explain and alter the decisions if needed. Even for vendor-provided systems, parents and students should be able to access support and accountability within the school system without having to go to the vendor. All of these accountability systems should be easy for families to access. They should be simple to find and use and should not incur costs for families. In addition to the best practices we just discussed, algorithmic systems and their data will need to be legally compliant as well. Relevant laws might include FERPA, COPPA, the ADA, civil rights law such as Title VI and Title IX, and state laws as well. Make sure your legal counsel is looped in when deploying these systems. We've nearly reached the end of our training. Please click through to the end for additional resources and contact information. Thank you for participating in our training. We hope it has been a helpful resource in understanding algorithmic systems and how to use them safely and responsibly. If you want to dig further, we've included additional resources from CDT and other organizations working to build more equitable and responsible systems. We've also included our contact information, so feel free to reach out with additional questions or suggestions on this training. Thank you again for joining us.